What they found was not just a corpse, but a cursed relic of medieval embalming. Organs ripped from her body, brain drawn through the nose, flesh stuffed with herbs, sewn like a sacrificial dough. Above her, the coffin of her greatest enemy, her own sister. In death, the rivals were stacked like meat, their bones fused by centuries of pressure and decay. This is not a tale of glory. It is a nightmare of royalty, where crowns dissolve and queens become poison. What they found inside Queen Elizabeth I's coffin was far more horrifying than you could ever imagine. Let the darkness begin. In the cold darkness of Westminster Abbey's royal vault, a lead coffin lay undisturbed for centuries, holding secrets that would horrify even the most hardened historians. When investigators finally breached the tomb of Elizabeth I, England's legendary Virgin Queen, they discovered something far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The mighty monarch who had defied kings, defeated the Spanish Armada, and ruled with an iron will have been reduced to something unrecognizable, a grotesque testament to the brutal realities of royal death in Tudor, England. The year was 6003, and England's golden age was drawing to its final agonizing close. Elizabeth the Fire lay dying in Richmond Palace. For weeks, she had refused to lie down, standing for hours on end, terrified of what would happen once she closed her eyes for the last time. Her courtiers whispered that she had seen visions of her own decomposition, of the savage treatment that awaited her body once her spirit departed. What they found centuries later would prove her fears were not only justified, but understated. The discovery inside her coffin revealed a horrifying truth about royal death that had been carefully hidden from history books. The embalming process she had endured was nothing short of medieval butchery, performed while her body was still warm. Her internal organs had been ripped from her chest cavity, her brain extracted through her nose, and her corpse stuffed with spices and herbs like some macabre Christmas goose. But the true horror lay in the cruel irony of her final resting place. Above her decaying remains lay another coffin, that of her half-sister Mary I, the very woman Elizabeth had feared and eventually succeeded. In death, these bitter rivals were stacked like cordwood, their royal blood meaning nothing to the worms that consumed them both. The woman who had commanded armies and inspired poets had been reduced to a chemical reaction, slowly dissolving in her own bodily fluids. This is not merely a tale of royal death. It's a journey into the dark heart of monarchy itself, where the divine right of kings meets the brutal democracy of decomposition. What investigators found in that tomb challenges everything we think we know about Elizabeth I's final days and the horrifying traditions that surrounded royal death in Tudor England. The revelations were so disturbing that they were suppressed for decades, deemed too shocking for public consumption. As we descend into this nightmare of royal mortality, prepare yourself for descriptions that will challenge your understanding of history's most celebrated monarch. The golden mask of majesty hides a face of putrefaction, and the scepter of power cannot ward off the inevitability of decay. What happened to Elizabeth I's body after death reveals truths about power, mortality, and the savage customs that lurked beneath the glittering surface of England's golden age. Tonight, we unlock the vault of secrets that Westminster Abbey has guarded for over 4 centuries. What emerges from that darkness will forever change how you view the Virgin Queen and the brutal reality of royal death. For in the end, even the mightiest sovereign is just flesh and bone, subject to the same inexorable laws that claim us all. March 24th, 603, Richmond Palace stood shrouded in an unnatural silence as Elizabeth I drew her final breaths. The woman who had ruled England for 45 years was dying as she had lived on her own terms, standing upright, refusing to submit even to death itself. For days she had remained on her feet, her ladies supporting her failing body, believing that once horizontal, she would never rise again. Here was a queen who had faced down the Spanish Armada, who had signed the death warrant of Mary, Queen of Scots, who navigated the treacherous waters of European politics with masterful skill. Yet in her final hours, she was reduced to a frightened old woman, clutching at the phantoms of power, slipping through her gnarled fingers. Her face, once the subject of countless portraits and poems, had become a grotesque mask of white lead paint and vermilion, cracking and peeling as her body shut down. Dr. John Manningham, who attended her deathbed, would later write of the horrifying transformation that overtook the queen. Her body had begun to swell with dropsy, her limbs ballooning with retained fluid. Her famous red hair, long since turned gray and hidden beneath elaborate wigs, had fallen out in clumps. Most disturbing of all, she had developed what physicians called the royal disease, a putrid abscess in her throat that made swallowing impossible and filled her mouth with the taste of her own decay. The queen's paranoia about her post-mortem treatment was not unfounded. She had witnessed firsthand what happened to royal bodies after death. She had seen the butchered remains of her mother and Berlin, hastily stuffed into an arrow chest after her execution. She knew of her father, Henry, whose corpse had exploded in its coffin, bursting through lead and wood in a final assertion of his corpulent life. These images haunted her, as she had explicitly commanded that her body remain untouched. But the machinery of royal death was already in motion. Even as she stood there swaying on swollen feet, the embalmers were preparing their tools. The sergeant surgeon had assembled his kit: razor-sharp knives for the abdominal incision, long metal rods for extracting the brain, hooks for pulling out the intestines, and buckets for collecting the blood and bodily fluids that would pour from the royal corpse. The court maintained the facade of normalcy even as their sovereign decomposed before their eyes. Courtiers continued to present petitions to a queen who could no longer speak. Musicians played in the presence chamber while their monarch stood like a statue, her eyes glazed with pain and fear. But she finally collapsed on March 23rd. It was almost a relief. James V of Scotland was already riding south to claim his inheritance, and the courtiers who had professed undying loyalty were calculating their positions in the new regime. Elizabeth I died alone at 3:00 a.m. on March 24, 6003, abandoned by all but a handful of servants who remained out of duty rather than love. The moment Elizabeth's heart ceased beating, her body ceased to be her own. Within minutes, the Lord Chamberlain had given the signal and a macabre transformation began. The corpse was stripped naked, revealing a body ravaged by age, disease, and toxic cosmetics. What the embalmers saw shocked even those hardened professionals accustomed to their trade. Her skin, beneath the layers of white lead paint, was a patchwork of sores and lesions. The Susie makeup she had worn for decades had slowly poisoned her, eating away at her flesh. Her face, with the makeup washed away, presented a skull barely covered by translucent skin. Her famous aquiline nose now a beak-like protrusion. Her lips pulled back to reveal blackened teeth worn down to stumps. The embalming process that followed was pure butchery. The sergeant surgeon made his first incision just below the rib cage, slicing through layers of fat and muscle with practiced efficiency. The stench that erupted from the body cavity was overwhelming decay, infection, and the peculiar sweetness of royal flesh preserved by a lifetime of rich food and wine. Attendants rushed to burn incense, but nothing could mask the smell of majesty putrefying. One by one, the organs were extracted. The heart was found to be enlarged and diseased. The liver, bloated with fatty deposits, spoke of luxurious banquets. Each organ was carefully examined, as court physicians believed they could read the secrets of her reign in her entrails. Some whispered of poison. Others noted abnormalities in her virgin womb, that organ which had been the subject of so much speculation. The extraction of the brain was particularly gruesome. Using a long metal rod inserted through the nasal cavity, the embalmer broke through the cribriform plate and began liquefying the royal brain. What emerged was not the seat of the brilliant mind that had outwitted Europe's greatest rulers. but a gray, putrid mass that splattered onto the floor. Despite their professional detachment, attendants were seen to gag and turn away. With the body cavity and skull now empty, the embalmer began preservation. The hollow corpse was washed with wine and vinegar, then packed with embroidery, frankincense, aloes, and sawdust to absorb remaining fluids. The whole was sewn up with thick thread, leaving crude stitches across the royal abdomen. The face was rebuilt using wax and plaster, creating a death mask that bore only passing resemblance to the living queen. A new red wig was placed upon the skull, and the body was dressed in magnificent robes of state. From a distance, she might have appeared sleeping. Up close, the illusion was horrifying. A wax dummy stuffed with spices, pretending to be England's greatest monarch. The state funeral was a spectacle designed to reinforce the power of monarchy. But beneath the pageantry lay disturbing secrets. The body in the magnificent effigy processing through London streets was already decomposing despite the embalmer's efforts. Witnesses reported strange noises, gurgling, hissing sounds from chemical reactions within the lead-lined casket. The smell of putrefaction, barely masked by incense, followed the procession like an uninvited guest. Robert Seale had orchestrated every detail with precision. The coffin, draped in purple velvet and topped with an eerily lilac effigy, was drawn by 4 horses draped in black. Behind it marched the nobles of England, their faces carefully composed while their minds calculated positions in the new reign. Citizens lined the streets, weeping genuine tears, unaware of the grotesque reality hidden beneath the royal pall. The journey to Westminster Abbey took 4 hours, during which the spring sun accelerated the chemical processes inside. The spices and preservatives reacting with leaking bodily fluids created a toxic brew, building pressure within the sealed container. Attendants had to discreetly puncture the lead several times to release gases, quickly sealing the holes before anyone noticed the telltale hiss. Dr. Anthony, Dean of Westminster, who presided over the burial, later confessed in private letters the horror he felt standing near the coffin. He could hear ungodly sounds of corruption emanating from within. The beautiful effigy above seemed to mock the reality below. While the wax figure showed Elizabeth in her prime, the thing in the coffin was rapidly dissolving into its component elements. The burial was rushed. As the coffin was lowered into the vault, witnesses reported hearing a distinct crack, the lead giving way or the decomposing body shifting within. The speed with which the vault was sealed suggested those in charge wanted to contain a potential disaster. Elizabeth was placed in the same vault as her half-sister Mary D. Bloody Mary, the Catholic queen whom Elizabeth had succeeded. The 2 sisters, bitter rivals in life, were condemned to share eternity in a narrow stone chamber. The immediate aftermath saw strange occurrences fueling rumors of supernatural disturbance. Abbey workers reported sound from the royal vault, not just decomposition, but what some described as scratching or knocking. The official explanation was rats, but those present at the burial knew better. Gases building in the poorly embalmed corpse caused the lead coffin to buckle and groan, creating sounds almost human in their desperation. For 265 years, the vault remained sealed, its contents left to imagination and nightmares. But in 1868, Victorian curiosity drove Dean Arthur Stanley to order the royal vault opened. What the investigators found that October morning would haunt them forever and provide shocking confirmation of centuries-old rumors. The first challenge was locating Elizabeth's coffin. When workers broke through the floor of the Henry VII Chapel, they encountered chaos. Water had seeped in over centuries, and the noble dead lay in various states of dissolution. Their coffins collapsed. Their remains mingled in a democracy of decay that recognized no earthly rake. Dean Stanley suppressed account paint a picture of Gothic horror. The stench, he wrote, was beyond description, not merely ancient death, but something more active, as if decomposition had been merely paused, not ended. The investigation team, equipped with early breathing apparatus, descended into what Stanley called the Corral House of Monarchy. Elizabeth's coffin was found beneath Mary T. Charest. Both laid caskets partially collapsed under their own weight and centuries of pressure. The lead had oxidized and split, revealing glimpses of horrors within. Through one split, investigators saw purple velvet lining, now black with age and moisture, clinging to shapes that might once have been human. When the team lifted Mary's coffin to access Elizabeth's, they made a shocking discovery. The two coffins had begun to merge over centuries. The weight pressing down had fused the lead to contact points. The enemy queens had become literally inseparable in death. Workers used metal saws to separate them, releasing new horrors as movement disturbed both coffins' contents. The interior of Elizabeth's coffin exceeded their worst expectations. The embalming had created a unique environment where spices and herbs combined with bodily fluids into a black tar-like substance that preserved some tissues while completely dissolving others. What remained was a horrifying mixture of mummified flesh, dissolved organs, and crystallized embalming materials. Most shocking was the skull state. The reconstructed face had collapsed inward. Wax and plaster melted and mingled with decomposing flesh. The red waste survived better than actual remains, creating a grotesque contrast. Vibrant false hair crowning a partially dissolved skull. The jaw had detached, still bearing stumps of blackened teeth. The investigation revealed the embalming had accelerated certain decay while preventing others. Organ removal created voids filled with putrefactive gases and fluids with nowhere to escape in the sealed coffin, creating a pressure cooker with the body essentially stewed in its own juices for centuries, breaking down and reconstituting in horrible new forms. The coronation ring, which legend said was soared from her swollen finger at death, lay loose among bones. Fabric fragments were fused to remaining skin, creating a patchwork defying separation. The golden orb and scepter lay tarnished, marked by acids of royal decomposition. Most disturbing was evidence decomposition remained active. When exposed to air, tissues began rapidly deteriorating, as if making up for centuries of suspended animation. Investigators watched in horror as what seemed stable remains crumbled before their eyes. The Virgin Queen was dying a second death, witnessed by Victorian gentlemen who thought themselves prepared for anything. The team worked quickly to document findings before resealing the vault. Sketches were made, measurements taken, samples collected. Dean Stanley's final note speaks volumes. "We have looked upon the face of mortality and found it wearing crown. Would that we had left in peace." The discovery sparked a crisis among participants. Victorian society, with its elaborate mourning rituals and belief in death's dignity, confronted evidence that even greatest monarchs suffered grotesque decomposition. Dr. William Hartley, the anatomist who examined remains, wrote in his journal of nightmares plaguing him for years. Chemical analysis revealed disturbing details. The mixture had created unique compounds existing nowhere else in nature with antimicrobial properties, preserving certain tissues while accelerating other decay. Elizabeth's body had become a laboratory for bizarre reactions, creating substances Victorian science couldn't fully explain. Science showed the body underwent multiple stages of decomposition and partial preservation, not simple progression from flesh to bone, but evidence of having decomposed, partially mummified, liquefied, and reformed multiple times. The sealed environment disrupted normal decay, leading to what Hartley termed recursive putrefaction. The psychological impact on Dean Stanley was profound. His later sermons dwelt on vanity of earthly glory. He ordered no royal vault opened again in his lifetime and left instructions for his own simple burial. The findings raised uncomfortable questions about other royal burials. If Elizabeth, who received the era's most elaborate embalming, decomposed so grotesquely, what of the other scientific analysis revealed the vault's atmosphere contained high levels of methane, hydrogen sulfide, an unknown compound from centuries of royal decay. Some investigators reported feeling elated and experiencing hallucinations while in the vault. Photography was available, but Stanley forbade documentation. Some horrors should not be preserved for posterity. Artists created heavily censored sketches. One locked in Abbey archives shows a human form melted and reformed like candle wax, crowned with a wig retaining its curl, while everything beneath dissolved. Queen Victoria was deeply disturbed by sanitized reports. She ordered changes to royal funeral practices, insisting on simpler embalming and quicker burials. The medical community was equally shaken, leading to complete revision of mortuary science to prevent recursive putrefaction in sealed environments. Among artifacts recovered was a small lid box containing what investigators believed was Elizabeth's heart transformed into a crystalline substance. Compounds of lead, mercury, and organic materials fused at molecular level. The Virgin Queen's heart had become a toxic jewel, beautiful and horrifying equally. This led to searching for other organs, traditionally buried separately. Found beneath the chapel floor, their containers had leaked over centuries, creating a pool of royal essence seeping into foundations. Westminster Abbey's very stones had absorbed liquid remains of monarchy. Workers reported certain stones, when struck, would weep dark fluid smelling of ancient spices and decay. Lord Salisbury ordered all official records classified for 100 years. But truth seeped out like fluids from those lead containers. The Gothic revival movement subtly confronted reality of medieval death. Modern analysis of surviving documentation reveals even more disturbing details. The embalming included substances now known as highly toxic mercury, lead, arsenic compounds, creating a poisonous environment. Elizabeth had been transformed into a toxic waste site. In her life, Elizabeth declared, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." In death, she had neither. Her heart crystallized into a toxic gem. Her stomach dissolved into chemical soup. Every triumph, every victory was created by beings who would inevitably end like their queen. Dissolved, decomposed, forgotten, except as chemical stains on stone. The investigation had one more surprise. Among vault debris, investigators found parchment fragments, documents buried with the queen. One fragment survived bearing Elizabeth's hand. "I dread not death, for it makes all equal." The irony is perfect. She had indeed been made equal to every corpse that ever rotted. As we contemplate Elizabeth's fate, we must ask what it means for our own mortality. The Tudor queen who had everything ended as a chemical reaction in a lead box. No glory could prevent it. No achievement for all it. The embalming meant to preserve her for eternity created new unique forms of decay. In trying to cheat death, she only made it more grotesque. Modern forensic science provides new insights. The sealed container combined with embalming chemicals generated adiposa, waxy substance from body fats. But Elizabeth's was unlike any studied. Royal diet, toxic cosmetics, unique embalming materials, and sealed environment created a substance defying categorization. Neither mummy nor skeleton, but something uniquely horrible. This dissolution extends to historical Elizabeth herself. Knowing her physical fate inevitably colors perception of her achievements. Can we read her speeches about having the heart of a king without thinking of that crystallized heart? Can we admire the Armada portrait without imagining the face beneath collapsed in a lead box? Contemporary attitudes toward death have been profoundly influenced, though few realize it. Modern preference for cremation, rise of natural burials, movement from elaborate embalming, all traced partly to horror of over-preserving the dead. Elizabeth's fate warns against hubris of attempting to cheat death through chemistry. Westminster Abbey remains London's most visited attraction. Millions walking above royal vaults yearly. The building markets itself as monument to British achievement, carefully avoiding mention of decomposed reality underlying its magnificent facade. Every prayer spoken rises through air flavored by gases of putrefying monarchy. The building itself is a tomb, not just containing dead, but constructed from them. The final irony, Elizabeth, who feared deeply what would happen after death, was absolutely right. Everything she dreaded came to pass. And worse, the embalms she tried to avoid had their way. Physical dissolution she fought by standing upright claimed her with particular vengeance. Privacy she guarded was violated by Victorian investigators gazing upon her most intimate decay. Yet perhaps there's strange triumph in this horror. Elizabeth achieved immortality through grotesqueness of her fate. Other monarchs are remembered for achievements. Elizabeth also for what she became. Horror of her decomposition ensures she'll never be forgotten. She became eternal not through preservation, but through putrefaction. As we close the vault on this tale, we're left with haunting images: crystallized heart, dissolved flesh, toxic mixture of spice and rot, lead coffin becoming chemical reactor. But most of all, knowledge that beneath stones of sacred spaces, behind facades of cherished institutions, lies the same horror, inevitable, democratic, utterly human process of returning to elements from which we came. The vault remains sealed today, contents continuing slow chemical transformation in darkness. But we who know truth can never walk those halls without awareness of what lies beneath. Every step presses upon dissolved monarchy. Every breath includes atoms. Once Elizabeth, she's gone and everywhere, absent and omnipresent, transformed into atmosphere and stone. In seeking to preserve her, they made her eternal, not as intended, but as nature decreed, dissolved, dispersed, forever part of the fabric meant to memorialize her. What they found inside Elizabeth Thursday's coffin was indeed far more horrifying than anyone imagined. Not just because of physical grotesquerie, but because it revealed fundamental truth that all power, glory, achievement ends the same way. In that lead box lay not just a dead queen, but death of illusions, decomposition of dreams, putrefaction of all human pretense. She had built an age of gold, but became base metal and decay. She had been Gloriana, virgin queen, mother of her nation. In the end, only chemistry, and chemistry recognizes no rake. The profound horror isn't what death did to Elizabeth, but what it reveals about life. Every moment of glory is performed by beings who will inevitably end as she did. We build monuments, craft legacies, achieve triumphs, all while carrying seeds of our own grotesque dissolution. We are all future chemical reactions waiting to happen. Elizabeth's story forces confronting this reality without illusion's comfort. If it happened to her with all resources and determination to avoid it, what hope for anyone? None, of course. But perhaps in accepting this horror, confronting it directly as those Victorian investigators did, we find strange peace. For horror of Elizabeth's fate is also its democracy. She, who held herself apart, was proven utterly, inescapably human. Divine appointment meant nothing to biological processes, claiming the humblest subjects. In death, she achieved equality rejected in life. The lead coffin meant to separate her from common burial created unique horror surpassing ordinary decomposition. Investigators who opened that vault in 1868 performed unintended service to humanity. They peered into our common fate's abyss and reported findings. Their horror becomes our knowledge, trauma, our education. We cannot unknow discoveries, cannot return to comfortable illusions about death and dignity. Elizabeth's fate tore away the veil, revealing skulls beneath skin of all pretensions. We leave Elizabeth where found in her lead coffin beneath Westminster Abbey, continuing centuries-long transformation into elements and atoms. But we cannot leave behind knowledge of what she became. It follows us out into daily lives. Every mirror reflection shows not just living face, but skull it will become. Every achievement celebrates, carries seeds of its own decomposition. Every life moment is shadowed by knowledge of how it ends. Perhaps horror of Elizabeth's fate serves necessary reminder of what we are. Not gods, immortals, beings apart from nature, but flesh and blood, subject to same laws as all organic matter. The Queen, trying so hard to be more than human, proved utterly, grotesquely, magnificently human. Her decomposition is ours. Her horror ours. Her fate ours. In death's democracy, we're all equal, reduced to same chemical processes destined for our own lead coffins. What they found inside Queen Elizabeth I's coffin was far more horrifying than imagined. But true horror lies not in physical details, but in what it reveals about human condition. We're all future corpses, eventual chemical reactions destined for unique decay forms. Elizabeth's fate makes visible what we carry within. Death democracy recognizing no rank, achievement, glory. In the end, all equal in the grave, subject to processes transforming Gloriana into grotesquerie. The only difference, her horror was witnessed and recorded, while ours passes unobserved in darkness awaiting us all.